Welcome to Shahnameh, Book of Kings. Today we continue with the war between Iran and Turan. Afrasyab made all speed from Destan to Ray, his horses sweating with exhaustion. Then he placed the Kayanid crown on his head, open court, and distributing gold coins. Rostam and Tuss received news that the glory of the imperial crown had dimmed, and that the king's head had been severed with a sharp sword. They tore out their hair and clawed at their faces, and lamentation was heard throughout Iran. These chieftain heads were smeared with dust, their eyes were filled with tears, and their clothes torn. They made for Zalavestan, speaking of the king and longing for him in their souls. They went mourning to Zal and said, "Alas, for Nazar and his bravery, his might, his crown, his magnanimity, protector of Iran, prop of the state, king of the world, most glorious of the great, scion of Faradon, of unmatched worth, whose horses' hooves subdued the willing earth. We'll dip our swords in poison and avenge his unjust death, relentless in revenge. The heavens weep to see our wretched fate, and you must put aside your robes of state to mourn beside us, to lament and keep this vigil with us while we grieve and weep." The whole company joined them in their weeping, groaning as if they were burning in fire. Then Zal said, "Until the day of judgment, my sword shall not see its scabbard. My horse beneath me will be my throne. My feet will be nowhere but in the stirrups, and my crown will be my helmet. I shall not sleep or rest until I have taken my revenge. The rivers flow with less water than my eyes flow with tears. May the king's soul be resplendent among his glorious peers, and may you comfort yourselves with the knowledge of God's justice, so that your hearts find peace. We are all born for death. We belong to death, and we have given our heads into its keeping." News reached the Persian captives in Sari that Zal and his companions were preparing an attack. They were disturbed by this, and in their anxiety they could not eat or sleep. They were afraid of what Afrasyab would do, and they sent a message to Al-Gruish, saying, "You are a great lord, famed for your goodness, and we live only because of your words. We are all your slaves. You know that in Zalavestan Zal reigns, and the king of Kabul is with him there, together with other warriors like Barzin, Karin, Kerdad, and Keshvad, the destroyer of armies. These are great heroes, who will not hesitate to use their strength in Persia, in its defense, and when they ride out to war, they can pierce a man's eye with a lance thrust. Afrasyab will be infuriated by their attacks, and he will turn his anger on his prisoners. For the sake of his crown, he will have all our heads roll in the dust, even though we are innocent of any crime. If Al-Gruish will agree to set us free, we shall scatter throughout the world, and we shall praise him before chieftains and nobles, and pray that God protect him." The wise Al-Gruish replied, "I cannot do this. My enmity toward the king will be plain, and that Ahriman will be enraged with me, but I shall try to help you in another way, one which will provoke my brother. If Zal attacks when he comes close to Sari, I shall hand you over to him and then evacuate Amal without fighting, and so bring shame on my head." The Persian nobles bowed their faces to the ground, and when they had expressed their gratitude to him, they sent an envoy from Sari with a message for Zal. The message said, "God has been merciful to us. The wise Al-Gruish has become our ally. He swears that if 2 men come here as Zal's representatives from Iran, he will not fight, but evacuate the area around Amal and lead his army to Ray. If this isn't done, not one of us will escape from the claws of that dragon Afrasyab." When the message was read to Zal, he said, "Now, my warlike leopards, which of you whose heart is blackened by war will undertake this mission, and so raise his head to the sun?" Keshvad slapped his hand to his chest and said, "I am prepared to do this." Zal called down blessings on him and said, "May you live happily for as long as the sun and moon exists." An army set off from Zavelston to Amal, and news of this reached Agruas, who had the brazen trumpets blown, and led his men toward Ray, leaving all the prisoners in Sari. When Keshvad reached Sari, he freed them and gave each of them a horse, and the group set off on its journey from Amal to Zavelston. At the news of Keshvad's return in triumph, Zal distributed money to the poor and gave the messengers one of his own robes. Zal went out to welcome Keshvad as was appropriate, and wept over the captives who had escaped from the lion's clutches. He brought them into the city with great honor and had palaces allotted to them, so that they lived again as they had done under Nozar, with their own wealth, thrones, and crowns. When Agris arrived in Ray from Amal, Afrasyb learned what he had done and said to him, "What do you think you are up to, mixing honey and bitter colocynth like this? I told you to kill them, and that this was no time for caution or high-mindedness. It is not for a warrior to worry about wisdom. That's not what brings him glory in battle. A fighting spirit and wisdom have nothing to do with each other." Agruas replied, "A little shame and a sense of honor are not out of place. Whenever you think of acting evilly, fear God and do no harm to anyone. The crown and the royal belt have seen many like you, but they stay in no one's possession for long." The king sprang up like a maddened elephant, and for an answer drew his sword, and then this faithless fool slashed his brother in two with a blow to his waist. Zal heard about what had happened to Agruas, and said, "His good fortune grows dim, and his throne desolate." He had the brazen trumpets blown, and the drums strapped onto the war elephants, and he drew up his army that glittered as splendidly as a rooster's eye. He led his men toward Pars, seething with anger as he marched. From sea to sea the plains were filled with men, and the faces of the sun and the moon were obscured by dust. When Afrasyab learned that Zal had mobilized his forces, he prepared for defense of Ray. The advanced troops of the two armies fought day and night, and many warriors and chieftains were killed on both sides. One night, Zal talked at length from Afrasyab, and his own warriors' battle, and those of his allies. Then he said, "If a king is to be fortunate and his soul to be luminous, he must be of royal lineage, and also he must be someone who is aware of tradition and the past. The army is like a ship, and the king on his throne is both the wind and the ship's pilot. Although both Rostam and Tuss are fine warriors, neither of them is worthy of crown and throne. We need a king who is fortunate, one who is endowed with the divine far and with wisdom." They searched among Faradun's descendants for someone who would be worthy of the throne. They could find no one but Zav, the son of Tamasp, to renew the glories of Faradun's crown. Karin, together with priests and the lords of the marches, took the good news to him that he would inherit the crown, since Zal and all the army wished him to be king. Zav accepted their choice and took his place on the throne. Zab ascended the throne on an auspicious day, and Zal swore loyalty to him. An old man in the 80th year, Zav reigned for only 5 years, but in that time he made the world young again with his justice and goodness. He stopped the army from committing crimes and prevented them from arbitrarily arresting people and killing them, and he communicated in his heart with God. At that time, the world was suffering from a famine. The ground was desiccated, and the plants withered. No winds blew, no rain fell from the heavens, and bread was worth its weight in gold. For 8 months the two armies faced one another, but did not fight, because their strength had been broken by the famine. People said to one another, "It is our fault that this evil hath fallen on us from the heavens." From both armies cries of hunger could be heard, and a messenger from Afrasyab came to Zav, saying, "Our fate in this fleeting world is nothing but pain and grief. Let us divide our lands and invoke God's blessings on one another. Our nobles are exhausted by war, and this famine means we must not delay in making peace." They swore that they would not harbor hatred for one another in their hearts, and that they would divide their lands justly and accordingly to precedent, and that they would not bear any grudge against one another for the past. Beyond the Oxus and into China and Khotan was to belong to Afrasyab, and Zal had no power beyond the border where the Turks' tents were pitched. For their part, the Turks would not advance into Iran. Although Zav was an old man, the world was renewed under his rule. He led his armies to Par, and Zal returned to Zavestan. Then the mountain tops echoed with thunder. The world flourished again with the colors and scents of flowers, and the land filled with streams, gardens, and flowing waters. The earth was lovely as a young bride, because when men do not have tigerish natures, she is not harsh and grudging to them. Zav called his nobility together to give thanks to God, saying, "Abundance has replaced famine, and God held the keys to change." Everywhere festivities were held, and men emptied their hearts of all anger and enmity. So 5 years passed without suffering, but when Zav reached the age of 86, his sun-like face faded. This kind, just man died, and the good fortunes of Iran faded. Afrasyab evacuated Ray and crossed the Oxus, but Pashang, whose heart was filled with hatred and his head with thoughts of war, sent him no greetings. Afrasyab dispatched a messenger to him, but for months, for a year, Pashang would not receive him. Pashang's heart was sated with the throne and crown. He felt like a rusted sword, and he grieved for the death of Agruas. He sent an envoy to Afrasyab, saying, "You should have been a friend to Agrias, but you shed your brother's blood and fled from the savage brought up by a bird. I want no more to do with you, and you will never, ever see me again." Time passed, and the tree of calamities bore bitter fruit. Information reached the Turks that Zav had died, and that the Persian throne was empty once more. All the world's ears were filled with the news. The imperial throne lies idle. Pashang sent Afrasyab a letter saying, "Cross the Oxus and lead an army into Persia. Do not wait until someone occupies their throne. I am sending you into war against our enemy. So far it is only your brother whom you've harmed." Afrasyab mustered troops and led them from the plains of Sebjab to Oxus, and the earth seemed like a heaven raining down Indian swords. When news reached Iran that Afrasyab claimed the throne, the Persians turned to Zal and addressed him harshly. "Gaining control of the world was an easy matter for you then. Since Sam died, you have been our champion. We have not known one day of happiness. An army has crossed Oxus and is bearing down on us, obscuring the sun with the dust it sends up. If you have a solution to this crisis, put it into effect, because the Turkish leader will be here soon." Zal said to his nobles, "Since I have bound on my belt to fight, no horseman like me has ever sat in the saddle. No one can wield my sword or mace, and I have fought night and day. I have feared nothing but old age, and now that my back is bent and I cannot flourish my Kabuli dagger as once I did. Rostam has grown to be like a tall cypress and deserves the diadem of greatness. He needs a war horse, and none of our Arab horses are equal to the task. We must find him a mammoth mount, and I will inquire everywhere for one. I shall ask Rostam if he agrees to my plan, and remind him that he was born to fight against the seed of Zadsham. I shall see if he is ready for that task." All the cities of Ayan rejoiced to hear his words. Zal sent out messengers in every direction and had the armor manufactured for his horsemen. Zal said to Rostam, "You have grown so tall. Your cypress body towers above us all. The work that lies ahead of us will keep our restless spirits from their food and sleep. You're still a boy, not old enough to fight. Your heart still looks for pleasure and delight. Your mouth still smells of milk. How can I ask you to take on this seasoned warrior's task, to fight with lion warriors and beat them back with their scatter and defeat? What do you say to this? What will you do? May health and greatness always partner you." And Rostam answered Zal, "Pleasure and wine, feasting and rest are no concern of mine. Hard pressed in war or on the battlefield, with God to aid me, I shall never yield. I need to capture with my noose a horse, of mountain size and weight, of mammoth force. I need a crag-like mace if I'm to stand against Turan, defending Persia's land. I'll crush their heads with their tremendous mace, and none shall oppose me face to face. Its weight will break my elephant. One blow from it will make a bloody river flow. Zal was so moved by his son's words that his soul seemed about to leave his body. Zal had all the herds of horses that were in Zavalestan, as well as some from Kabul, driven before Rostam, and the herdsman explained to him the royal brands that they wore. Whenever Rostam selected a horse, as soon as he pressed down on it, the horse's back would buckle beneath his strength, so that its belly touched the ground. But then a herd of horses of varying colors from Kabul was driven past him, and a gray mare galloped by. She had a chest like a lion's, and was short-legged. Her ears were pricked like glittering daggers. Her fore and hindquarters were plump, and she was narrow-waisted. Behind her came a foal of the same height and breadth, of chest and rump as his mother, black-eyed and holding his tail high, with black testicles and iron hooves. His body was a wonder to behold, like saffron petals, mottled red and gold. Rostam watched the mare go by, and when he saw the mammoth-bodied foal, he looped his lariat and said, "Keep that foal back from the herd." The old herdsman who had brought the horses said, "My lord, you can't take other people's horses." Rostam asked who owned the horse, since its rump bore no trace of any brand. The herdsman said, "Don't look for a brand, but there are many tales told about this horse. No one knows who owns him. We call him Rostam's Raksh, and that's all I know. He's been ready to be saddled for 3 years now, and a number of nobles have chosen him. But whenever his mother sees a horseman's lariat, she attacks like a lioness." Rostam flung his royal lariat and quickly caught the horse's head in a noose. But the mother came forward like a raging lioness, as if she wanted to bite his head off. But Rostam roared like a lion, and the sound of his voice stopped the mare in her tracks. She stumbled, then scrambled up again, and turned and galloped off to join the rest of the herd. Rostam tightened the noose and pulled the foal towards him. He pushed down with all hero's strength on the foal's back, but the back did not give at all, and it was as if the foal was unaware of Rostam's hand. Rostam said to himself, This will be my mount. Now I can set to work. He will be able to bear the weight of my armor, helmet, and mace, and my mammoth body." He asked the herdsman, "Who knows the price of this dragon?" The herdsman replied, "If you are Rostam, then mount him and defend the land of Iran. The price of this horse is Iran itself, and mounted on his back, you will be the world's savior." Rostam's coral lips smiled, and he said, "It is God who does such good work." He set a saddle on Rakish, and his head whirled with thoughts of war and vengeance. He opened Rakish's mouth and saw that he was a swift, strong, courageous horse. Each night Rostam burned wild rue before him to ward off evil. From every side Rakish seemed to be a magical creature, swift in battle, with large haunches alert and foaming at the mouth. Rakish and his noble riders seemed to bring to Zal's reviving heart the spring of joy. Zal opened the doors to his treasury and distributed gold coins, careless of today and tomorrow. And now we end our tale for today, but I'll be back tomorrow with more tales, many more. Until then,